All right, so today, I don't believe I've consumed any political news this morning except perhaps scrolling on Facebook before I got out of bed, which, by the way, you're not supposed to do that, so don't do that. Other than that, I don't think I've not consumed any political news on YouTube this morning, I think, which is pretty unusual stuff. So, day one of the political news ceasefire, I guess. What I am doing, though, is listening to a book by Dan Martell called Buy Back Your Time. I've talked about Dan Martell before on the channel here. I was in his funnel, so to speak. I was in communication via email with his team or bots or somebody, and had the opportunity to purchase his coaching program. Decided not to spring for it at this point, but may at some point, who knows. Anyway, so we may be getting some more content here on the subject of time and buying back your time in business operations, because that's what I'm inputting at the moment. So, one of the ideas I think that is an interesting idea around time is the idea of taking responsibility for how much time you have. Now, it's true that time, in some sense, is a finite amount. In other words, there's a day is basically the same. It's 24 hours for all of us. We all have a certain time at which we will make the transition from Earth, in our mortal bodies here, to to the world beyond, heaven or hell. Or whether there's some in between. By the way, I'm not sure on that, but I think you go immediately to heaven or hell. And then, so let's just say basically that essentially you have a finite amount of time. So in that sense, it's fixed, right? However, there are several important ways in which it's not fixed. Or there's an important way in which it's not fixed, and then there's a mindset that goes with that. The way in which it's not fixed is, most of us are trading our time for something in exchange, right? Especially when it comes to our careers. We're typically exchanging our time for money, but also other things too, for the things that we want to accomplish in the world, maybe through our career, for our mission. We're trading time to achieve something. And so the sense in which time is infinite is that there's always the opportunity or the potential to utilize the time more effectively to make a better trade, essentially. So that when you're trading an hour, you get more from that hour than you would have otherwise. And so the mindset that goes with that is a mindset of personal responsibility, or of ownership, maybe would be the better term, for the amount of time that you have. So rather than simply saying, time just goes so fast, I don't have enough of it, it's too bad, I'm just sunk, here we are. Another way of looking at it is, well, there's always better ways to manage time. There's ways to get more from the time that you spend, right? Now, one of my friends was talking with one of his friends, and was saying, at the end of the day, you always are trading time for money, essentially. Like your rate of return may be really high. So if you're a billionaire, and one day every year you sit down with your financial manager, your family office, and he goes over the money with you, you give him some direction on what you want done with your assets and stuff like that. And then the rest of the year, you're making millions off of your investments. Well, essentially, you can say, well, that's passive, and mostly it really is. But you can also make the argument, actually, it's not. If he gets, let's say, $4 million in essentially in profits, which is probably not quite the right way to describe it, but let's say it's $4 million in profits from his billions of investment. And he gets that and he has to works one day every year to oversee things. then that means that his rate, essentially, his hourly rate is something like, um, $500,000 an hour, or something like that, right? Or if it's maybe a person like that is making, let's say making 20 million, right? Well, let's make it easier. 32 million, okay? Let's say they're making 32 million a year. He works 8 hours that one day, and so his effective hourly rate is $4 million an hour. And so, that's. But you think about that person's time versus my time right now. I don't make anywhere near $4 million an hour. And so you could argue that there's a sense in which that person has a lot more time because they are able to be much more effective with some of their time. So time is not a standalone item. It is connected to the other things in your life. So if you have, let's say if you have family drama, then that's going to tend to take time away from other pursuits. And so you're going to have less time to do things that are cool, fun, and productive. Let's say if you have major health issues, and you're going to many doctor's visits and things like that, we've experienced some health challenges in our family, then yeah, that puts a drain on your time. And so then that also creates a drag on your overall, your time. So the time is not as fixed of an item, I would say, as what we often think it is. And I think if we take some ownership and we say, it may be that sometimes in my life I tend to feel like, hey, I'm busy, my time's filled up, or my energy is, I've got all the work that I have energy for. But I can choose to just kind of rest on my laurels there and just kind of hope that things smooth out with time, or that I come up with something to improve the amount of time that I have. Or I can work strategically to make progress towards getting a higher return on my time. So whether that means, hiring someone to do some tasks, and maybe, sometimes there's some risk involved in doing that, or whether it means really working on my energy to improve my energy so that the time I do spend working is more effective, or that I can put more hours in. There's all sorts of things that I can do in theory to improve my output or my return on time. I think return on time, ROT, I think is probably one of the better measurements of the effectiveness of someone's life. Now, having said all that, don't hear me to say that the only ROT that is important is financial ROT. Return on time, in case you've forgotten what that is. There's relational ROT. You may be going out to, let's say you're having an activity that you're doing socially that's taking up quite a bit of time, but you're not actually building any deep relationships off of it. You may look at that and you may say, this is a bad ROT. Another ROT is, it may be harder to quantify, but it has to do with the quality of your relationship with God. So that relational ROT is probably not something you can. It's something you can maximize in the sense that when you are trying to spend time with God, that you are extremely focused on it. But it's not something you can outsource, right? It's not. I can't hire someone to have a relationship with God for me. And so the sort of Western notion, if you will, that the value of my life is entirely wrapped up in the productivity of my life, in the productivity in the typical sense of getting work done, that I don't think that is not a satisfactorily comprehensive way of looking at ROT. So it definitely needs to address things like relational elements, spiritual elements, investments into the kingdom of heaven. These are, I think fundamentally, you have to look at your time reference, right? So if your time horizon is eternity, and you're optimizing your ROT for eternity, then I think you're on the right track. If you're optimizing it purely for, let's say, retirement, or purely for income over the next 10 years, or something like that, probably it's certainly possible to optimize for that and get much better results, perhaps, than what you're getting currently, but it's not satisfactorily comprehensive. It's not, for me and my values, it's not adequately lined up with that. So, anyway, just some thoughts on time, taking ownership of time, and the fact that time is not as fixed as you may think, but that it relates to a lot of different things, and you have the opportunity to get a lot more from your time if you want to, and if you have the commitment to do so.